Okay, U.S. history. Today is the day we are finally going to start taking some notes, and that is very common in my class to have notes. We take notes most days, but we are going to do some review activities first. Make sure you're getting out a paper, pencil. Remember, you can always pause me, but this is going to make your life so much easier as you're moving forward. Otherwise, you're just going to have no idea what's going to be on the next test. But I'm going to start off with a reminder that your document of the week is due by the start of your class on Friday. So remember, your document of the week is always going to have your name in the upper right-hand corner. You're going to have your source. Now, you guys don't have to attach the source because the way I showed you how to do it, it's digital. It's automatically going to attach it for you. This is more for when you're in person. But you always list your source. This week, it's Janelle Collette Analysis. And then you always do a summary, 3 sentences for non-honors, 5 for honors, putting the information in your own words. Opinion, 3 sentences for non-honors, 5 for honors. And the challenge is when I'm handing you a document, is it primary or secondary? And we're actually going over that in our notes today. But I do want to go over something you did yesterday. And that was these standardized test questions. You did, now I'm filming this at 8 in the morning, so there's not too many done yet because the video just released. Because I record these the day before. The video just releases around 7. But I've given you this test question that I've used on tests before, that I could be using on a couple of the versions. I have 5 versions of the test for you, so I can give different versions to different classes. But this is the sort of question I might ask about bias and reliability. And I haven't taught you this yet, but I'm still trying to teach you how we grade. And so you had this grading activity. And if you haven't done this yet, one, you're not getting the tickets because I'm doing the tickets for it. It would be tomorrow morning, which for you is right now. But 2, it shows you how I grade. And if you understand how I grade and how the state grades and how the air grades, then you're going to write better. But let's look at the actual question. So I'm telling you that we have 2 statements and then a chart. So statement A is that Sandusky is an amazing place to live, and then a lot more quotes about, which I agree, about why Sandusky is awesome. Statement B is much more about stats and figures. It tells you the population, the breakdown, some financial things. And the question is, which statement is more reliable and why? And even though I think both are true, one can be proven and one cannot be. When we talk about reliability, just can we believe this for sure? Even though you might share that opinion, that is an opinion. This can be backed up. We can go to the U.S. Census Bureau and we can find all of this data. We can find all of this data somewhere. So this is the much more reliable statement. Statement B is infinitely more reliable because it's based in facts. That's something we're going to try to reinforce over and over again. Even if you might agree with this opinion, it is an opinion. So if you say, switching it to something else, Mr. Penrose is ugly. You may agree with that, but that is an opinion. Mrs. P doesn't think I'm ugly, so take that. If you say Mr. Penrose is 48, that's not an opinion. That's something you can prove. You look up the birth certificate, whatever. You've got to know the difference between what can be proven and verified. That is reliable. If it's just an opinion, you may share it. You may agree as well, but it's not reliable or valid. So which statement is more reliable? Absolutely statement B. Why? It has verifiable facts. Now, looking at the chart below regarding arson. Arson is a fire that you set on purpose. This has stats about Sandusky compared to the rest of the country. Is it reliable? Well, they're just giving data. So yes, it is reliable. They're giving you data about how many arsons occur in Sandusky versus the U.S. average. And except for 2 years, way more arsons occur in the country than occur in Sandusky. So Sandusky doesn't have a particular problem with people setting intentional fires. Now, some people do it, so I guess it is a problem. But for the most part, and I don't know what was going on in 2009, but for the most part, we have less of a problem than most cities across the country. So is this reliable? Yes. Now, what can you conclude from that? Well, that's where you have to you have to look through it and derive something from it yourself. You could conclude from that with the exception of 2 years, we are way below the average. In the last 3 years, there hasn't been more than, what's that look like, 11. In the last 2 years, it looks like there's been less than 10 arsons a year. there's different things you could conclude from it, but it has to be, you can't conclude something that's not here. You can't say, I conclude that no one ever sets fires in Sandusky. Not true. Even though in 2002 it was only maybe 2 or 3, there were 2 or 3. You can't conclude that the country has a, per 100,000 population, by the way, a huge arson problem. I don't really know if you can pull that from this. So just what you can draw from it, that arson in Sandusky has gone down the last 3 years, while the national average has been, it's only gone down in the last year. Things like that. That's how you're looking at sort of these standardized questions. All right. So let's go back to what would be normally our notes. I'm going to show you one more weird thing before we do our notes. I want you to be on the lookout for this weird looking guy. If you ever see him in our notes, and he'll be hidden, and I do this when we have regular in-person class. This is Edgar. He is, quote unquote, an Easter egg. Technically, an Easter egg is something you hide in usually technology, like a movie or a video game. And then if you find that Easter egg, you get some sort of reward. So in at least old school video games, I'm sure they still do this. If you clicked this button and that button a certain way over a certain thing in the video game, all of a sudden like an extra life would be unlocked. Or in early DVDs, like for, I think it was The Matrix, if at a certain point in the movie you pushed the right series of buttons on your remote control, there'd be like a behind the scenes documentary. So I'm trying to get you to pay attention to the notes, and so I'm literally putting in this Easter egg, and then in a live class, if you say, oh, I see that Easter egg, which I've just, because I'm silly, have named Edgar, and you say Edgar, then I show you, I give you like a digital reward. I show you some silly 4-minute video clip to make you laugh, and it's just a reward. In this world, you're all watching it at different times, so if you're the first person in your class to comment, I saw Edgar, and you say where, then you will get tickets. And of course, more tickets means more chances at Document of the Week passes and other prizes. Okay, notes. So ladies and gentlemen, every time we start a unit, we are always going to start off with terms for the unit. You do not need to write all of this gobbledygook. I'm just telling you this, but you do need to write terms from Unit 1 and write down these terms. They're going to be a great study guide for you. Now, normally what I would be doing is saying, okay, let's look at these terms. Can you tell me what you think it means? And if you happen to have your own definition and it's close, I'll let you know and go, okay, look, hey, we're already on track. If you don't know, it's no big deal. You write it down. I'm going to reinforce this idea all year. Not knowing a term at the beginning of the chapter is no big deal. But at the end of the chapter, when you're getting ready to study, if you don't know that word, that's a big deal because you should know it by then. And if you don't, it's a big indicator that you better study. But I can't really talk to you about whether or not you know these words. So what I'm going to do is just show you the words. Now, in a live class, I'm going to list these one by one and kind of see what you come up with. And different chapters have different amounts of words. But for this chapter, it's market, command, mixed, traditional. Some of you have already figured out that these are economic systems, okay? And we'll get to those, I think, in tomorrow's lecture. Tariff, I don't know if you know what that one is. I think you probably have an idea. You're probably close. Bias, we're going to talk about today, and primary and secondary, we're going to talk about today. So these are words, particularly bias or unbiased, primary, secondary. I don't care that you don't know them yet, but actually by the end of class, you should know them. And then when you get ready for the test, which right now looks like it's going to be probably next Friday, then this isn't the only thing that's going to be on the test, but a good place to start in preparing for the test is, do I know these vocab words? So pause me right now if you haven't finished writing these terms, because I'm going to move on past them, but I want you to get these terms written down. Just hit pause real quick. Okay, I'm going to assume you are done with these terms. Again, you want to write this stuff down. It's going to help you. So we are going to our first set of notes. No, don't look at that. We're skipping. Here we go. Very first notes for 2020-21. May it be better than 2019/20. Okay. We are going to start off the year talking about, and this whole theme of this whole unit is important stuff that doesn't really get covered in sort of the normal class. So it's just going to be this hodgepodge of things that I want to make sure you know, but don't really fit in anywhere else. So things like, oh, how can we tell if a source is biased or not? Or what if it's primary or secondary? Or we're going to talk about regions and themes. And then after we do this sort of basic unit, then we're going to do another basic unit on just documents that you just should know. And then we're going to go in chronological order. We're going to talk about history from 1877 to yesterday. So let's talk about source basics. Bias versus unbiased. Okay, this is going to be a big theme all year. Now, I'm testing you on it in this chapter, but it'll come up again in other units. You have to know the difference between something that's biased and unbiased. Okay, so if it is biased, it means it's not neutral. It has opinion in it. It is an opinion. In other words, it can't be proven, kind of like I showed you with those questions. If it has bias, it has opinion. Now, you may agree with that opinion, but it is an opinion. Very important that you know the difference. Now, if it's unbiased, it's neutral, it's factual. You can prove it. And one of the things that you're eventually going to do, not this week, it'll be really a little bit next week and then moving forward, is you're going to look at news stories. You're going to say, are they biased or unbiased? That's going to be your challenge then. Now, this week your challenge is primary or secondary because you're dealing with a historical source I'm giving you. But eventually when you do news stories, you're going to say, is this biased or unbiased? A lot of times, if you use the Sandusky Register, or for that matter, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, or most newspapers, most of them, for the most part, their actual news stories are generally unbiased. But some are biased, and so most of the time you're going to be able to say a news story is unbiased. Why? Because they just gave me the facts. You read in the Register about a car accident. This Penrose guy, 48, failed to yield and hit this car. 2 people were sent to the hospital. Mr. Penrose was cited. All they did was report facts. That's just an unbiased story. They just gave the data. That's what newspapers do most of the time. Now, once in a while, they have some bias that slips in, and then I'm going to say, hey, you make sure you show that. So if the newspaper said, Penrose, this crazy driver, out of nowhere, recklessly did this and hit these people, well, that would be pretty biased. It sounds like they're putting a lot of opinion in that article. So that's not as reliable. That's all it is. It's not as hard as it sounds. And we're going to show you some examples. But in general, if a story is reliable, it's not biased. Now, bias is in the news all the time. It's particularly the news you watch. So you'll have liberals or Democrats say that Fox News is biased. They only say good things about, say, Trump and Republicans, and Republicans and conservatives tend to say that basically MSNBC, and they, I think, would argue CNN and mainstream media are biased against conservatives or for liberals. There's some debate about how biased either one is, but those are ideas. So I'm going to show you some examples of things that I just looked on the internet for like 5 minutes tops and found some biased and unbiased pictures on some news sites. So I didn't bother to write down where all of them were, but I want to show you something as simple as not even like the words they're using, the pictures they're using. Okay? So I'm going to go to some pictures of Trump and Biden. Now, I know some of you are sick of politics and you don't care, and I'm not trying to sway you one way or the other. What I'm telling you is some of these pictures are biased and some of them are unbiased or maybe positively biased. So if you don't like Trump, a very biased thing you can do is pick pictures that are unflattering. These are very biased pictures. I understand, they're real pictures. These are images of him that were captured. But when you are president and you are basically in front of cameras every day, you can be caught in some bad pictures. That's just the way it is. So there's some pictures like this of Obama where he's just making weird faces because he gets his picture taken 1 billion times a day. Now, if you like the president, if you are biased in favor of him, there's certainly more positive images you could see. So what you sometimes see in a news story is you see a news story that actually is fairly unbiased, but you can tell somebody's got some bias because they pick a picture that it just feels like they went out of their way to make the president look bad or look good. So if you just see him at the podium, maybe that's neutral. This is kind of biased against Trump. This might be a little biased for Trump, but I tend to use the ones that were released by their office. Like, I'm going to let each politician, Democrat or Republican, have the sort of what they considered their best picture, the one that they released on their website. So I believe that's this one. This one I got off Fox News. This one I got off MSNBC. I can't remember where I got this one. So you can see there's bias. You don't like the president, whatever story you're printing, you put this picture. You like the president, you put this picture there. This one is what I would use because it was released by his office, and that just seems fair. So same token, same idea, go with Joe Biden. If you don't, this picture's funny, sorry. If you don't like Joe Biden, you use this picture because I don't know what face he's making there. If you like Joe Biden, you use this picture. Although this was taken the same way this one was by a staff photographer at the White House. So this one would be sort of the one that you would use, I would use, because I always use the one released by their office. Same thing for a senator. But if you use this picture, clearly you don't like Biden. It's funny to use that picture. If you use this picture, clearly you don't like Trump. That's why you're doing it. Your news shouldn't be biased, but unfortunately, sometimes it is. And so we're going to have you help identify that. But bias can go to a million other things. The paper, you can decide, is the Sandusky Register biased or unbiased against, simple things like a school. Listen, I'm sure I don't know how that happened. I'm sure if you go through the history of the newspaper, there are going to be some that were biased for and against a particular school. I'll even say that some of my favorite articles about Sandusky High are biased because what they do, and I think it's Caitlin Nearhood at the Register, is sometimes they just do a nice story about, Perkins some weeks and Sandusky some weeks and St. Mary's some weeks, where they just say, hey, tell us something good about going on in your school, and then you print that. There was just one out, I believe, about an art program going on at Sandusky City Schools. So it was a really nice article, but it was biased because it was just like, here's all these good things, and it was very opinionated. I agreed with the opinion, but it was opinions. Okay, home stretch on the notes. So, primary versus secondary sources. This is actually something you're going to need for your document of the week. Now, I tried to explain it quickly on Monday's notes, or Monday's lecture, but if you didn't catch it, and again, you should be writing all of this down. I want you to physically write down all of these notes, because if you don't have them available to you, that test is going to be a lot harder. But primary sources. A primary source is something that is original to the time or the event. So it can be a physical object. It can be something that was written in reflection of it. It can be any number of things that have a direct linkage to the event. So I have a bunch of newspapers in my room that came out the day after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Those are primary sources because they were written by people who witnessed it. The one from the Plain Dealer, the guy happened to be in Dallas, Texas, covering the president's visit for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. He saw it with his own eyes, and I have these original newspapers from 1963. But a source is secondary if essentially, and by the way, you don't have to write a YouTube link, and you don't have to write these things in blue. These are reminders for me, just what's in black. A source is secondary if something is removed from an event. So our textbook talks about JFK's assassination. The author of our textbook, as far as I know, was not there. They are removed from it. They're saying back in 1963 this happened. If you have something from 1963, that's primary. If your grandparents happen to be there, they themselves would be a primary source of the event. Anything that you read a book about JFK's assassination, that's probably a secondary source, although they might have some primary sources in there. If Mr. Talbot and I got in a fist fight, okay? It's such a ridiculous example. But Mr. Talbot and I get in a fist fight, it's during live school, and you guys all see it, it's in the cafeteria. All of you who witnessed it, would be primary sources. You were there. And then the video you took, because of course you would take video of it, that would all be primary sources. Okay? Now, when you read about in the let's see, when they revoke our teaching licenses, and you read about it in the paper 6 months from now about how we lost our teachers' licenses after our hearings, that would be a secondary source. What a ridiculous example, but I think you get the idea. Primary, it's something that was original to the time. That can also be some sort of object you find, like, oh, this is the pen that Thomas Jefferson wrote with. That's a primary source. That is something from that actual event. If you go to the Smithsonian, they have all these physical objects. Oh, they literally have almost looks like a shrine to the chair that this one famous politician, Henry Clay, sat in. That's a primary source. That was something original at that time. Anything else is pretty much secondary. So you want to look at that source that I gave you for your document of the week this week and say, is that primary or secondary? Well, if I had assigned you the Abigail Adams letter, which is the one we did for practice, that absolutely would be primary. But here's a little reward for anybody listening to this video or watching this like you should be. You have this woman named Janelle Collette, who's a very good scholar from what I can tell, but she's talking about this Jane Addams letter like in today, like the 2000 teens is when she wrote this. She wasn't around in 1776. She's saying, hey, this letter is very important. This ends up becoming a very important letter in history, so it's an important thing, but she wasn't there. It's a secondary source. She wasn't there. So when you say why, this is a secondary source, she wasn't there. Now, if I had given you the Abigail Adams actual letter, which is the one we practice on, you'd say, oh, this is a primary source. This is actually from Abigail Adams. That's all there is to it. So you have all the notes you need to have for today. This little stretch right here. If you have all of these notes right here, you are good. On Thursday, we are going to take a few more notes. We're going to reinforce some of this stuff in the live sessions and keep moving forward. And again, probably looking at a test next Friday. All right, everybody. Keep up on your videos. Remember, watch us every single day and get your notes in there every single day. Have a great day.